Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Carolinas Weather Group. We're very thrilled to have you guys on tonight watching us for the October the 14th edition of our show. It is just a little bit after 8 o'clock. Sorry for the delay. We're trying to get Jim on to the Hangout, and everything's good and connection's good. So, again, we apologize for the slight delay. But tonight we're going to be talking about the fall colors. We're really entering the peak season here in the Carolinas and Virginia, Tennessee, most of the southeast, especially in the Appalachian Mountains, are starting to see the peak season of leaf colors. And then as you go down in elevation in the next couple of weeks, we'll start to see those really peak as well. And so that's the topic tonight. We're going to talk about how that happens and how the weather affects it. We have on Jim Duthie from KTVB in Boise, Idaho. Jim is the meteorologist out there as well as a master gardener, so he really knows the ins and outs of plants and the whole process. So we're looking forward to that tonight, and I'm ready to learn a little bit about that because I don't know much about it, and I hope that's why you've tuned in as well. A couple of housekeeping rules. We are a live broadcast, so if you have any questions, please feel free to ask us on the question and answer tab. You can also shoot those through Twitter as well as Facebook. We'll be monitoring that. If we have any questions for our guest tonight, we will throw those questions out there. This is a podcast, so make sure that you download it. And a lot of our episodes have just been downloaded from the past few weeks. So if you have not been able to get those yet, they are available now on your favorite iTunes or your favorite app store that you can download those. So with that, I will stop babbling on. I'm going to toss it down to Kit, who is at UNC Charlotte tonight. Kit, has been a very beautiful day. And how's things down in the Charlotte metro area?
Well, it was really, really nice day outside. Unfortunately, I was inside all day staring at PowerPoint slides. Wednesdays are my long days, so I don't see the light of day very much. But after class, about 5 o'clock, I went outside for about 20 minutes, and it was absolutely gorgeous. I actually did have lunch about 1:30 in the sun. It was about 76 degrees, which is my perfect time of weather. It's like that perfect time of the year where it's chilly in the morning, but not cold enough for a coat, so it's jeans and t-shirt weather, which is my absolute favorite. But it's looking like this weekend is not going to be as pleasant, so it's going to be jeans and jacket weather.
Yeah, we're going to get some of Jim's weather in here. Temperatures in the low 30s, upper 20s in some of the mountainous locations, so our first frost and freeze definitely looking to be affecting most of western and central North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. So it's going to get chilly. So with that, I'm going to throw it over to Joey, who is over in the, I guess, Sandhills Triad area there in the Thomasville area. Joey, how is weather there in central North Carolina?
The weather here is windows open weather. That's what I call it. Every window in my house right now is wide open. I haven't had the air on for a couple of days. So I'm definitely enjoying that. I'm excited about the show tonight. I'm the guy, every year I have to make my pilgrimage to the North Carolina mountains just so that I can see the leaves. I'm that guy. Except you won't find me on the Parkway. I know that's where everybody, like, let's go ride the Parkway. You won't find me on the Parkway. The only reason why you will find me on the Parkway is on my way to the apple orchard that I always like to stop at. Other than that, I'm not getting on the Parkway. I'm off of there. So maybe if we have a little time in the show, I'll give you guys a few good little back roads. So if you want to stick around to the end, I'll tell you where to go around North Carolina to see some leaves and not run into other people.
Very awesome. And now we're going to toss it up to the Northeast. Our fellow Carolinian who is actually living in the Northeast of Philadelphia. Peter, how are you doing tonight?
Good. We're good. Weather's been pretty good here. A little cool the last few days, but we're supposed to be in the 30s this weekend, so not going to enjoy that at all. But I've already had the heat on once so far this year, so yeah, not going to be good. I don't like the cold weather.
Yeah, you're with me. I want it to be about 80 degrees all year round. So
exactly.
That's the perfect weather in my opinion. So tonight, let's bring in our guest, Mr. Jim Duthie. Again, he is the meteorologist at KTVB in Boise, Idaho. Jim is a meteorologist there, I believe, on the weekend side, as well as a master gardener. And Jim, thank you for coming on the show tonight. Welcome.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Scott. I appreciate the invitation. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, we like to have fun, and this is something in the Carolinas, in the Southeast especially. A lot of people travel to our mountains and look at the leaves, and I'm sure you guys probably have the same thing there in Boise with a lot of leaf lookers coming to the mountainous areas.
Well, you know, Boise is located kind of on the edge of the Rockies forests and the high desert of the Great Basin. So we're right on the cusp of the forest. But they call Boise the city of trees, and it's about the only city the pioneers, I guess when they came through, was the only valley they saw with trees in it. So that's what they nicknamed it, La Bois, or Boise, Boise, the trees, the woods. And we do have a lot of trees here, but the difference between us and you is that we don't have a lot of the native hardwood species out here. So most of the trees we have are scrubs at the lower elevation, and then you get up into the pines, ponderosa pine forests, and firs and tamaracks and so forth. So we don't get the vivid colors like you get back in the east, but all of the trees that have been planted in the valleys are starting to change right now, so it's pretty colorful here.
Very good. Well, Jim, kind of introduce us to yourself, your career in meteorology, and then maybe we can go into talking about the topic tonight.
Well, okay. I grew up in southern Arizona in a little town called Douglas, which is right on the Mexican border. It's about 120 miles southeast of Tucson, if you know where Tucson is. And so that's a desert area, kind of a high desert location, about 4,000 feet or so. So about all we had was mesquite brush and cactus growing around. So I didn't grow up seeing any of the fall colors that you're used to unless somebody had a specimen tree in their yard or something. Most everything just turned brown and fell off, and fall and winter didn't hit until about early December, and then it was over with by about early February or so. So it wasn't until I went off to college at the University of Utah in Salt Lake that I got to see what real winter was like. But I did spend 2 years living in Pennsylvania. So as you talk about being up in the Philadelphia area, I actually lived in Media, outside of Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, and also spent quite a bit of time in the Susquehanna Valley. So that was a treat for a couple of years to experience some of the color changes in the fall there.
And then your adventures took you out to Boise, Idaho. Is that correct?
Yes, I worked for a private consulting company for a time in Salt Lake City called Weather Bank, and we forecast the weather for a lot of commercial entities, ski resorts, power companies, others, as well as film companies. So we would do private forecasting for all of those commercial interests. And one of the arms of the company was broadcasting, radio, and a little bit of television. So that kind of got me in that angle. And after being there for about 20 years, I had a chance to come here to Boise for various reasons and love it here. So I've been here in Boise for about 17 years, and KTVB is the local NBC affiliate, and just a great station to work for.
Very cool. Not to steal Joey's thunder, so I don't know if he was planning to ask you this, but everyone has a weather event that gets them interested in meteorology. What was your event living there in Arizona? A lot of people here in the East, it was a Hugo or the blizzard, things like that. What got you interested in weather?
Well, about once or twice a year, we would get a good winter storm. Even in the place that I lived in the desert, we'd have a big snowstorm. It would snow about 5 or 6 inches maybe every few years, and then it would melt all the way by afternoon. And I always was wondering how we got that process. And growing up, I was enticed by the big thunderstorms. We'd have sunshine in the morning, and then all of a sudden you get a big thunderstorm form during the afternoon and build up. We get a little localized flash flooding, and then it would be gone a couple of hours later in the evening. So that basically interested me in meteorology in the first place. In 1970, early September, in fact, it was Labor Day weekend, we had a tropical storm that moved up out of the Gulf of California, Tropical Storm Norma, and it made it all the way into the Phoenix area before it dissipated as a tropical depression. And it produced something in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 inches of rain within a day or so, which for a place like Arizona that can't handle that type of precipitation in such a short time, it caused some devastated flooding. And I had an uncle who was a highway patrolman at the time, and he was unfortunately killed in one of those flash floods as a result of trying to get back to an area to provide some assistance. And so, you know, that was a kind of a traumatic experience for our family, but it was tied so closely into weather that it interested me in following that kind of a career path and find out what caused that kind of a thing. So it's been an interesting development.
Wow, that's an interesting story. Well, I found out about you. I was doing some Googling on different news stories and shows about leaves and colors and how they change, and I came across your story there on KTVB, and it's what made me reach out to you and see if you wanted to come on the show. So tell us a little bit about the whole process. You know, in the summertime, springtime, we start to see the leaves come out, they're green. But what takes place in the summertime and the fall time that makes those green leaves change into the reds and the yellows and things like that?
Well, one of the fun things I've been able to do here is a weekly garden segment called You Can Grow It. We cover all aspects of gardening. And so in the fall every year we do some special things with the color of the leaves changing and so forth. And we have a lot of variation in topography and geography here in Idaho, of course, because just 15 minutes away I can be up at about 7,000 feet. Here in the valley we're just below 3,000 feet elevation. So we have some very drastic changes not only in elevation but also in the types of plant material that grows at those different elevations. And so you'll see the foothills change color several weeks before we start to see any changes here in the valley. Take a drive a few hours north up into the central mountains of Idaho, you'll see the colors about a month before we see them really changing here in the valley. So there are a lot of cottonwoods. Up in the mountains you'll see some clusters of aspens and poplars along with the real dark evergreens. So that gives us a real brilliant contrast with a lot of yellows and golds, but we don't get all of the reds and purples so much that we see in the eastern forests. So, you know, in the summertime, the leaves start to come out on the trees in the spring, and those leaves are basically little food factories that are producing the sugars that the tree needs to grow and survive and basically live on during the following winter. And if it weren't for the process of photosynthesis that we're all familiar with, being able to convert those sugars from the water that the roots take up, the carbon dioxide that enters the leaves, and then of course through the use of chlorophyll, taking the sunlight to create the glucose and sugars that the plant needs, then we wouldn't see those changes. Everybody asks me this time of year, is it because it's turning colder that the leaves are changing, or is it because we had a dry summer or a hot summer or whatever? But the overrunning thing that changes the colors of the leaves, of course, is the change in daylight times. The trees know when the nights start to get longer that it's time to start shutting down, start preparing for the colder weather which is to come. Now, about a year ago, at least here in Idaho, we had a very hot summer and we had a very warm fall. And all through September and October, I kept waiting for the freeze to occur. Our normal first freeze date is around October 10th. And that never happened. And in fact, I had grown some huckleberries in my backyard in the garden. And they said, don't pick the huckleberries until you have your first frost or first freeze. Well, the garden was all gone by November 1st. We still hadn't had a freeze. And I was waiting for that to happen. We stayed in the 60s and 70s right up until about Veterans Day last year. And then overnight had a major cold front come through and we dropped to the single digits at night for about a week after that. All of the leaves on the trees froze on the trees, just turned brown pretty much, and some of them never even fell off until the new leaves came out in the spring. So that was something that hadn't happened here in many, many years and really garnered a lot of interest among residents here as to the process. One of the problems is that there's hardly a yard at a home or at a business that didn't have some tree damage this year. So many trees died because of that cold snap because the trees didn't have a chance to shut down and prepare for the cold. So we're hoping that the process this fall is going to be a little bit nicer. We're starting to see better colors than we did last year, but we're past our first freeze date here in Idaho and haven't seen it yet. I don't know, have you had frost or freezes yet where you all are?
Not yet. Our typical frost freeze is for the mountains about October 1st. Here in the foothills to the Charlotte metro area, mid-October. So if the cold temperatures do come this weekend, like we're thinking, we're going to be right on time with our average first frost and freeze. So we'll see. The models are trending colder and colder. So it looks like that's a good possibility that we see it this weekend.
Well, we're close to 80 degrees today here.
Wow.
Sorry,
Jim, you were talking about how it's more affected by the change in daylight hours than the cold, which I'd never really had any light shed on that before. But maybe talk about what the difference is like in, like you mentioned, aspen trees, the difference between those and maybe pines, because pines don't tend to really shed their needles like aspen trees would.
Well, that's right. The evergreens, the spruces and pines and cedars and firs and so forth, they're able to survive winter a little bit better because they don't have leaves, but the needles are kind of coated with a waxy material. And most of the fluid within the leaves and within the tree is more of a resiny material, so it's not as susceptible to freezing as most other trees are, which have a more watery sap or fluid inside. And so the stems and the twigs and the needles themselves are better accustomed to withstand the really cold weather, and so they don't drop off. And so they can handle even Arctic temperatures in wintertime. Sometimes you'll see some pine trees or evergreens that do lose their needles, but that's not because of any kind of a seasonal effect. It's more because of maybe drought or because the needles just get old and start to fall off. But in broadleaf trees, it's a thinner material, and so they're more tender and vulnerable to damage because of any freeze. They're not protected by any thick coverings, and the sap or the fluid is a thin, watery sap that freezes more readily, and so that means that they're not going to be as effective at resisting freezing as the needles will. So what you have throughout the season is chlorophyll. You have three pigments basically in the leaves. You have chlorophyll. That's what basically produces the green color. And throughout the entire spring and summer season, the chlorophyll is busy being produced and busy being active as the catalyst to utilize sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water to produce the sugars in the leaves for the tree. Inside the leaf cells also are the other pigments, and besides the chlorophyll, you have the carotenoids. Those are the yellows, the oranges, the browns, those pigments. And so that's what gives the colors to carrots, and corn, daffodils, and those kind of other plants. There's one more pigment, and you mentioned it a minute ago, I heard somebody say the anthocyanins, and they are the reds and the purples, but they usually aren't produced until fall. And so all of those other pigments are masked by the green chlorophyll. They're there in the leaves, but they're covered up by the green chlorophyll. What eventually happens as we get into the shorter days, there's a trigger mechanism that tells the tree to stop producing chlorophyll. So with less chlorophyll, and in fact the chlorophyll begins to diminish and be destroyed, then those underlying pigments of yellows and reds and so forth begin to come out. The reds that you find in maples are because of the anthocyanins, which are triggered by the glucose material in the leaves. They get trapped in the leaves, they don't flow back into the trunk itself, and that's what turns red. So aspen trees, for example, start to give you the yellows and the golds because the chlorophyll diminishes and those carotenoids start to show through.
Jim, one question that we get asked constantly. What you explained what causes the leaves to change, but we all know that some years are better than others. Some years we have lots of vibrant colors, some years we don't. The question is always, why do we have years that are better, and what would be the perfect storm for the best leaf color?
Well, you know, besides the lengthening of the nights, you also depend a little bit upon the weather. That is the amount of moisture in the soil, and of course the temperatures. So a warm, sunny day during the fall with a relatively cool, crisp, but not a freezing night seems to bring about the most spectacular displays of color in the leaves. And so a lot of sugars are still being produced during the daytime because of the sunlight and the warm temperatures, but at night the veins that close off that take the sugars back into the tree, and they get trapped in the leaves. And so that's what leads to the more brilliant colors. Now the amount of soil moisture also affects autumn colors from year to year. A late spring or a severe summer drought can make a big difference on when those colors start to produce. And so the onset of fall color might be delayed by a few weeks because of a hot, dry summer or a late spring. and then that warm period during fall will lower the intensity of autumn colors if it has been a very dry summer. And that's been the case out here in the West, of course. You know, you've heard all about the California drought. Well, that drought also expands up into Oregon and Washington and even into Idaho in some respects. And so this year isn't quite as spectacular in some of those areas as it has been in previous years. So the veins trap the sugar in the leaf. Once that separation layer is complete, then the leaves can drop off. But that's the main difference. The basic if you want to give a rule of thumb for colors, the best autumn colors come when there's a warm, wet spring, and then a summer that is not too hot or dry, and then fall with plenty of warm, sunny days and cool nights, but not freezing temperatures.
So, Jim, here in the Carolinas, you and I talked a little bit beforehand last week. Most of the Carolinas, the Southeast in general, was in a drought, pretty big drought that started back in May and has lasted all the way up until the last couple of weeks. And a lot of our leaves, people up in the mountains were telling us, you know, the leaves haven't started changing colors yet. We're finally getting into the process of, today it was in the 70s, tonight, you know, 40s. We always hear we want those warm days and those cool nights. That really helps the leaves start to change the colors. And is that a true fact, or is that something that we can go by hearing?
No, that's exactly right. That's probably the best scenario, is the warm sunny days and then the cool crisp nights, but the intensity of the colors will be affected a little bit by the amount of moisture. So if it has been very dry, then especially during the time period when the chlorophyll is very active, during the spring and early summer, then that's what's going to affect the color intensity in the fall. So yeah, the warm fall days and the cool nights is great, but it kind of depends on what happened several months ago as far as rainfall and soil moisture. Here in Idaho, at least in Boise, we average about 11.5 inches of rain a year. You had up to 20 inches in a couple of days there a couple of weeks ago in parts of the Carolinas, which of course led to all that devastating flooding. I can't imagine if we were to have that much rain here in such a short period of time. 20 inches in a year would be an amazing year for us. It was a relatively dry summer for us, and so the colors are not at their peak. New England seems to be having a pretty good year. From what I've understood, I read that the numbers for fall color tours are up this year, up in places like Vermont and New Hampshire, and it seems like they had plenty of moisture, but they're having some nice mild weather this fall.
Now, I just made this connection that you said a couple things earlier. But like, again, you'd said that it usually depends on the time of day and the hours of the lengths of the night. Is what usually dictates how soon the leaves start to change. Well, sometimes like on higher mountain peaks, those will start to change before the valleys. Does the temperature have a little bit of effect, or is it more of just an elevation, oxygen level type of thing?
Well, I think it all comes into play there. The basic trigger mechanism, of course, is the length of day, and it might be the types of trees that are growing at those elevations that are programmed to start changing when there's a certain amount of daylight. The daylight never changes, of course. The daylight changes are constant throughout the year. The variables are the weather conditions, the amount of moisture, temperatures, and so forth. But I think you'll see some trees that naturally start to change a little bit of color starting even as early as mid-August and into late August. A lot of that has to do with the amount of different enzymes within the leaves, the amount of anthocyanins and so forth. I'm not exactly sure. Scientists are still trying to figure that mechanism out exactly, and every different specimen and species of tree has a little bit of a different point when it starts to change. Oaks, for example, don't change to a lot of different colors. You'll get some yellows and browns and russet colors. Those leaves generally stay on the tree all winter long, and it's not until the new leaves form and start to bud out that it pushes the old leaves off. So every tree has its own little trigger mechanism, but it's basically caused by the shorter days. And so along about the equinox time, September 21st, 22nd or so, within a few weeks of that, you start to see the change. I was up in the mountains last week for a couple of days, and they were just changing, or just reaching their peak of color change. And that was at elevations up about 6,000 to 7,000 feet. Down here in the valley at about 3,000 feet, we're just starting to see the big change developing now. But then again, we don't have a lot of those same aspens and tamaracks and so forth that they have up in the higher elevations. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it definitely does. I had a thought but lost it. It had something to do with daylight, but Scotty, do you have something? Okay.
Well, I was gonna talk a little bit about this. You were talking about drought, and it's kind of away from the leaf segment, but it's something that is really big in North Carolina and even out in the west is the apple crops. And I've heard this year that the apple crop was very minimum here in the Carolinas just due to the drought. Maybe could you talk a little bit about, we can still kind of talk about leaves, but this thought popped in my head. Maybe you talk about how droughts in general can really hurt crops, and along with that the leaf colors and stuff like that, because that's something we haven't really talked about a lot along with this drought is the effects on crops it's had.
Well, that's true, and you know, there's been billions of dollars of damage to the agricultural industry, for instance, in California. That's the most severe drought that we hear so much about all the time. A few years ago, much of the central and southern plains underwent a severe drought. You can irrigate, but that's very expensive, and water supplies, of course, get diminished very quickly. Aquifers are depleted very quickly in ongoing droughts. Crops like apples, for example, need a lot of water, not only to sustain the tree itself, but in the production of the fruit. And so in years when water supplies are less than normal, depleted for one reason or another, the tree has to take on more of a survival instinct and put the water into the best use to store enough sugars and so forth to promote survival of the tree for another season. It may not produce as much fruit as far as reproduction of the plant as it will just to make sure it survives the season. We've seen that problem here. One of the big crops here in our area is grapes. Lots and lots of vineyards in this area, and also cherry orchards. As a result of last year's late freeze, but severe freeze very quickly, almost every cherry tree in the valley either died or sustained heavy damage. And so it almost wiped out the cherry industry here in southwestern Idaho. And a lot of trees are having to be replaced this year. But before that, the cherry crop was diminished a little bit anyway because of a couple of years of ongoing drought. So that definitely makes a big difference, because you have a fruit like an apple which contains a lot of water. It's not going to get as much water up out of the soil. You can continue to irrigate and pump water, but the soil moisture content, and even in years when we have some rain, what they want to measure is the soil moisture content. You may have adequate rainfall or near normal rainfall, but it takes a few years sometimes to replenish the actual soil moisture that may be depleted over a couple of years of drought.
Very interesting. And talking of that, we're talking about how drought hurts crops. But is there any crops or anything like that the lack of water actually helps them out a little bit better, as in growing and stuff?
A good question. I'm not a commercial farmer, so I'm not exactly sure. I know that here we also have a lot of subsistence dry farming. We have a lot of hay fields and alfalfa and so forth, which they grow, of course, to feed cattle and horses. And I have a brother-in-law about 40 miles from here who grows alfalfa and hay. He says, I wish it wouldn't rain all summer long. I said, well, that's kind of odd for a farmer to say something like that. He says, no, give me all the snow we can get, store it up in the mountains and run off into the reservoirs, and then stop the rain and let me control it with my irrigation. He can get, in some years, 3 or 4 cuttings of hay or alfalfa, depending upon how long the season lasts. And so they cut off the water at a certain point to let it mature and ripen, and then harvest it, and it needs to stay dry or it'll rot in the fields. So sometimes they don't want any rain. They'd rather just control it all artificially with irrigation.
I know that was kind of
Cactus, where I grew up, cactus did fine without rain.
I know that was a little off topic, but it just kind of popped in my mind because I have heard in the past where a lot of farmers have said, I wish we wouldn't get as much rain as we've got. It kind of saturates the soil, and then I've heard some say, that the lack of rain or a little bit of rain goes a long way in helping their crops out. So that was just something that came across my mind. All right, looking.
Yeah, and I think out here.
Go ahead.
Sorry about that. I was just going to say, out here in the West, anyway, we're used to a drier climate than you are in the East, and so we also have a lot of different types of horticulture going on here than you would in the East. Unfortunately, in many of these drought areas, they've been accustomed to having plentiful water storage and irrigation, and so they're going to have to learn to shift some of their horticulture production to other things in order to deal with less water. And that's going to be a big transition for a lot of commercial growers in the West anyway.
That's very good. Well, guys, as I have another few topics or another few things that are not leaf set, I would like to ask you guys, have anything about leaf set before we kind of transition into, we're closing in on about 15 minutes till, so as we kind of transition into the ending part of the show.
Well, I did remember what it was that I had earlier. Here we rarely have a plan of questions, so we're kind of jumping all around here, going back and forth. But you did mention like how oak trees don't drop their leaves, whereas like lots of other trees do, some earlier than others. What is the process of making the leaf fall off, and why do oak trees not?
Yeah, that's a good question. In fact, I'm going to find my notes here. I wrote something down so I can kind of explain that in case you asked. There are some certain cells right where the leaf connects to the stem, and as the chlorophyll starts to die, it triggers those cells to start sealing off the layer that connects the leaf to the twig. And so as it does that, then eventually it dries it out completely, and at some point wind or something else will eventually knock those leaves off of the trees. And so the difference is, it's called a separation layer, so it forms right at the base of the leaf stem. And as I mentioned, oak leaves are the exception because the separation layer never fully detaches the oak leaves, and they just stay on the leaf throughout the winter. Some of the earliest leaves to fall, I've noticed at least in some of the trees in my neighborhood, seem to be the poplar trees, and they're very subject to heat stress. And so when we have a prolonged period of high temperature, even if you've just pumped water on those trees, sometimes those leaves will start to dry out and fall off anyway, and it's kind of a protective mechanism within the tree. Lose the leaves, retain the water, because a lot of the moisture from the trees that's taken up through the roots is lost through transpiration through the leaves. And so in order to protect itself, it'll rather lose the leaves than lose the moisture.
Cool. Scotty, you had a couple things, I think.
Yeah, since, Jim, you are a master gardener, what are some of the best, I'm going to kind of transition away from the leaves here, what are some of the crops that really prosper in the fall? What are things, if you're planting a garden right now, what's in your garden? And talk to us about how fall is a good time for those plants. And then one other question I want to ask is, how does winter play into this? Is there some different crops that you can plant in the winter? As the spring comes on, it really helps them out and stuff like that.
Yeah, some people, as we move into fall now, most garden plants, and I'm thinking mainly vegetables, we'll talk about vegetables, vegetable gardens, because you really don't have enough sunlight to keep the plant going in fruit production. So the plants start to shut down, they're not producing as many blossoms and so forth, even if it stays warm enough that it doesn't freeze. And so eventually, say in the next month or so, most gardens will start shutting down and go to bed for the winter. There are some plants that do pretty well in the cool weather, and those are some of the plants that you would put in the garden early in the spring. For example, peas, cabbage, some of the root crops, carrots and beets and so forth, that do pretty well in cool weather. Others are very tender, like cucumbers and squash and tomatoes and things like that, which don't do very well at all in temperatures. In fact, tomatoes need nighttime temperatures of about 55 degrees or higher over a consistent basis to really flourish and produce blossoms and produce tomatoes. So when it starts cooling down in the fall, the days may be warm enough, but the nights are still cool enough, you're just not going to get very many new tomatoes. So what's on the plant may ripen up a little bit during the day as long as it's warm and dry. In the late fall, in fact, a couple weeks ago, I planted another whole crop of lettuce, salad greens, and things like that, because they'll do well right up through the next couple of months, and even if we start getting frost at night, it's going to tolerate it pretty well until it gets to be really hard freeze on a consistent basis. So I can have some fresh lettuce, fresh salad right up even toward Thanksgiving time. Kale does pretty well through the winter. Do you like kale? A lot of people don't like kale. I'm not a fan, to tell you the truth.
That's very interesting. I that's one thing that I lack in my weather knowledge is about the gardening side of everything. So that is good. I think Peter has a question specifically for those folks who live in Idaho. You're muted, Peter. There you go.
Always muted at the wrong time. So how are the potatoes growing over there? I know you guys usually grow potatoes over in Idaho, so how are they doing this year?
Yeah, everybody knows about Idaho potatoes. Actually,
Yeah.
in Boise, which is in the southwest part of Idaho, we don't grow very many potatoes here. They're mostly over in eastern Idaho and some up into eastern Oregon a little bit, but they have had a very good year. Last year and this year were very good years for potatoes. On the negative side of that is that the price of potatoes dropped because there's an overabundance of potatoes, so it's kind of a two-edged sword there. What we grow a lot out here in southwest Idaho is sugar beets, and there are a lot of sugar processing plants that manufacture your basic table sugar out of sugar beets, very high sugar content in those plants. They take a lot of water to produce, and so in lean years, for instance, last year we had kind of a dry year, but we had a lot of carryover in our reservoirs from the previous year. That got us through the summer and the growing season. This year, it's depleted, and if we don't have a wet winter, and it's looking like it might be a relatively dry and mild winter overall, then we may not get adequate runoff to refill the reservoirs to their capacity. So next year might be a little leaner as far as sugar beet and potato production.
So that's the potatoes and beets right now.
Yeah. Start stocking up on canned beets and potatoes.
Jim, you said the price of potatoes might have dropped. They still cost me the same at McDonald's.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of those potatoes I think are frozen from several years ago that you're eating at McDonald's.
Oh, maybe that's what it is. All right. Jim, I always have one question to ask every one of our guests. We have a lot of teachers and students, for that matter, who watch our program, and so we always like to ask our guests, for that teacher out there who's helping mentor a student into the field of meteorology, or for that student who's thinking about a field of meteorology, what is the one piece of advice you can give them?
For a teacher?
Teacher or for the student, whichever.
Or for the student. You know, I think, you know, I graduated from high school and college back in the dark ages, it seemed, many years ago. Things have changed a lot since then. My wife is actually an elementary school teacher, and I think the success she finds is understanding how to be creative and versatile in the classroom. You've got to be able to teach according to the methods that the child needs to learn. Not every child is a cookie cutter shape. They all have different ways of learning, and you've got to be able to incorporate those different methods of teaching a little bit so that they can grasp the concepts you want them to learn. For a student, though, I think they need to ask questions. They need to be curious, and then in response, the teacher needs to be prepared to entertain their curiosity and answer their questions within the bounds of whatever subject they're teaching. You know, we can learn everything we want from a book, but until your imagination gets going and the questions that you come up with are answered, you're not really going to learn to your fullest capacity. So I remember some of the instructors I had in college, of course, and you probably do too, in meteorology courses, that, boy, there were some really boring classes, and you got through them just by paying attention to whatever was written in the book, especially when the professor wrote the book. That was the toughest class. But the classes I enjoyed most, I think, were the ones where it was structured enough for us to be able to ask the questions that interested us, that would lead us to do more research and study on our own.
I had a high school science teacher. I won't name names, but he wore plaid pants all the way into the 90s. But he almost completely ruined science for me. You talk about a professor who wrote the book too. He might not have wrote the book, but what he did was he literally did not use the book. He got the overhead projector and wrote notes, had us copy the notes, and then he tested us on the notes. That's all he did. He never did anything but just wrote it on the board. And we were supposed to copy that, go home, and study. We spent an hour-and-a-half block class, never did anything hands-on except for copy those notes. This close to ruining science for me.
I would loved it when you would have an instructor who would say, okay, this is an open syllabus. I want you to turn in what you want to learn. And he would take the suggestions from the students and then design the syllabus for the course around that. So those were a little bit more interesting anyway.
Yeah, that would have been nice. That would have been nice. This was just completely dry and horrible. I'll never forget it. That was the only science class in my life that I failed. I failed that science class. Whoops. And I took the exact same class the next semester and had 101 average by the end of the grade. To tell you the difference between two teaching styles. There you go.
That's it. That's the whole difference. That's true.
All right, Jim. Well, we're closing in closely on the top of the hour. I have one question for you, though, since you're a gardening expert. You live there in Boise, Idaho. I want to know what kind of grass seed is planted on the Boise State football field to make it blue.
I'll tell you, that takes a lot of water to grow that grass blue.
I'm telling you what. I mean, I want some of that in my yard. I want it to be, just seen from miles away. That's. Do you go to Boise State and watch any of the football games?
Oh, definitely. In fact, I've done my show many times on the news, done the weather report from the blue turf, especially on game days. Go down there and broadcast the morning show from the blue turf. And it's always a treat. And the interesting thing was this summer we had an international soccer exposition. We had a team from the Basque Country over in Spain and a team from Tijuana, Mexico that came and did an exhibition game here. And they took, I don't know how many square feet it was to cover that field of live turf, brought it in and covered that blue field with live turf for them to play that soccer tournament on. And they had to lay down all kinds of different matting underneath to protect that blue turf from the actual live turf that they laid on top of it. It's quite a transformation. I remember being there broadcasting that morning and looking at all the different layers from the green down through the coverings into the blue. And then they removed that green turf after the tournament was over and took it to a local park and replaced the turf that had been damaged from various events throughout the year. So now a lot of kids who are really into soccer get to go down there and play soccer in that park and say, hey, this is the turf that two famous teams played on. But it didn't damage the blue at all. The blue continues to thrive.
That is pretty awesome. Is it hard to watch a football game there? I mean, it's got to be a little bit different your first time being there and watching it compared to what a normal football field looks like.
I don't know. I'm pretty used to it now. I think the hardest part for anybody is when the Broncos wear their blue uniforms against the blue background. And that can be pretty intimidating, I think, for the other team.
Yes, that's pretty awesome. I always enjoy watching a game there. It's just one of those unique things of college football. I know Joey's a big college football fan.
Yeah, I was gonna say me and Scotty are Florida Gators, but I'll tell you what, I don't think any of us weren't excited when the Statue of Liberty play got run in the the Fiesta Bowl that year?
Fiesta Bowl, yep, Oklahoma.
Yeah, beat Oklahoma. Yeah. I tell people I show that one to my kids because I remember I guess it was the quarterback. He runs the play. The Statue of Liberty successful touchdown. They win the game. And he runs straight to the cheerleader and drops the one knee and proposed or something.
Ian Johnson. Everybody remembers him.
Yeah, it was great. It was like the perfect college football moment right there, all in the one. It was big.
Well, we're keeping our fingers crossed we have the opportunity to play the Gators one of these days.
No,
I don't know. I don't know if we want to play you guys. You might beat us.
Well,
hopefully you come here to our blue field.
The 49ers, we're going to take on you both, and we'll lay this down.
Y'all have real footballs here? Y'all still playing with Nerf balls there, kid?
Hey, now.
Speaking of that, I won't let you get off of here though, since you are a graduate of the University of Utah. There, they're having a good football season, right?
This year? Yeah, so far.
Yeah. So far, well, hey, I saw they had 16 number one votes in the AP this year or this week.
Well, yeah.
So,
yeah, we kind of got knocked out of the top 25 briefly, but made it right back. Just that one loss to be most, but we're gonna get back in there and at least hopefully take the conference and get to another bowl game.
Very awesome. Well, Jim, I'm gonna hang on to you for just a second. We're about 2 or 3 minutes away. I'm gonna let Joey talk about his locations on the Parkway that he recommends everyone in the Carolinas to go look, and then we'll kind of close out with you, Jim, promoting some of your social media pages so our followers can follow you.
All right.
All right, I'll be quick about it. Everybody, we have a lot of our followers who are from, obviously from the Carolinas, since that's where we kind of did our home base. We started out of. A lot of people ask me every year. I get questions constantly, Facebook, Twitter. Joey, where do I go? Where do I go? Because everybody goes to the Parkway and it's bumper to bumper traffic. This weekend it's going to be beautiful weather. It's going to be perfect. I promise you, it's going to be bumper to bumper traffic. So what I tell people is, you stay off the Parkway. Just don't even go unless you absolutely have to get on there to go somewhere else. Avoid it. Number one rule: avoid the Parkway, because I'm telling you, if you do that much, you have a lot better experience. But a couple of roads that I always tell people to try on. If you want to stick to main roads, there's Highway 80, which runs out of Marion towards Mount Mitchell. You have 221, which runs Blowing Rock. It basically runs along beside the Parkway. It's still pretty busy, though. My absolute favorite road, and Scotty probably knows where I'm talking about, it runs right along Wilson Creek. Best way to go is you go down Attico Road, you make a right onto Brown Mountain Beach Road. Google it. Just Google Brown Mountain Beach Road. It'll get you on that road. Once you get on
Highway 90.
Highway 90. Okay. Yeah, Highway 90. Yeah, that's right. Highway 90. But anyway, I like to start right there at Brown Mountain Beach Campground and just follow it right along the river. You're going to start off at a lower elevation. I promise you. Even if the leaves aren't changed there, just keep driving. It's a gravel road. Most vehicles will make it just fine. And my phone just keeps going off, so I better mute that. But it's a gravel road, so but most cars will make it just fine. If you have an SUV, you have nothing to worry about whatsoever. Most cars will make it up that road, no problem. Just keep following it all the way up. You're going to come to a T intersection. When you get there, you make a left. That's Edgemont Road, and just keep following that road. It's going to be a long, winding gravel road that goes up through the mountains. It's got a full canopy of trees. You will literally go from green trees down to bottom. Your trees will change colors as you go up, and then eventually you're in the rhododendron and all the high mountain plants that you see once you get towards the top, and all the leaves will be changed once you get there. I've actually told stories where I took people up there before, and it would be sunny at one spot, and we'd actually have snow once we got to the top because the weather would change so quickly. I mean, within like a 45-minute drive, and you're into a blizzard. Obviously during the wintertime, but yeah, during the fall, that's my favorite road. Another tunnel road out of Asheville is another way to kind of avoid the Parkway, but still be pretty close to civilization. One key thing, the road I sent you on, Brown Mountain Beach Road, Edgemont Road, you're not going to find any bathrooms. You're not going to find any stores. There's not going to be any gas stations. You'll be lucky to see a house. There are a few of them. I wouldn't suggest pulling in anybody's driveway up there either, if you know what I mean. But yeah, it's just a long, winding gravel road. It's a great little path. That's where I send a lot of people every year. I've been up there numerous times. I bet in 15 years of driving that road, in the peak of fall season when literally the Parkway would be bumper to bumper, I could probably count on two hands how many cars I passed on that road during that time. So there's been times when I've gone up through there and not seen another soul, another person, another car, anything. So that's my number one road to go on. But like I said, main thing is stay off the Parkway. If you have an SUV, just drive. Go anywhere. You're not going to there's nothing up there that's going to get you in any trouble. I promise you can always turn around. If you have a smaller car, you might run into a few issues in the mountains on some of those old, dirt, gravel roads, but most of the time, I wouldn't even worry about that. If you get on the road and it looks sketchy, turn around. It's not that hard. Just avoid the Parkway. You'll have a lot better time not being anywhere near the crowds. Oh, and the road I sent you on, Edgemont Road, really neat thing. It actually comes out below the Linville Viaduct that goes around the side of the mountain. You actually drive under. At one point, you can look up and see it, and you're underneath it. So it's a really cool road. So there's my suggestion, Scotty. I'll let you go from here.
Yeah, and another one that Joey didn't suggest, if you are watching from Eastern Tennessee, Southwest Virginia, up where Ricky broadcast at, Roan Mountain, Tennessee is beautiful. It is one of the best locations that you can see some good color as well as some snow, right, Joey?
Yeah. We're coming up on that anniversary, right?
Yeah, about two or 3 weeks away last year.
That was the 1st of November, I believe, last year when we were up there.
Yep.
If I can get my 2 bits in, I love Ashe County. My grandparents have lived up there since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, but Ashe County has some really pretty scenes up along, I think it's Highway 16 that goes up there from my neck of the woods, but like along 163 that takes you basically right through downtown West Jefferson, but just in that valley you've got the mountains on both sides, and then just the town there is really pretty to look at, so that's one of my spots I like to go.
It's beautiful up there as well, and get you some Ashe County cheese, right?
And if you need any suggestions on where to eat in the mountain, the Fat Guy's got you covered. Y'all just hit me on Twitter.
All right, enough about North Carolina travel. Let's kind of end the show here. Jim, thank you so much for coming on tonight. We'd love to, if you have Twitter or Facebook you'd like to promote, so our followers can message you or tweet you or just follow and see what's going on in Boise.
You know, I tell you, I'm from old school, and I don't even tweet. Can you believe that? But I am on Facebook, and you can find my Facebook fan page at Jim Duthie at KTVB, and that's in Boise, Idaho. And I always post my garden segments on there as well as some weather updates. So hope to see you on there.
Very awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for coming on. And who knows, maybe we can wrangle you back on some other time and talk a little bit about something else.
Thanks for the invitation. Great to talk with all you guys. Have a great fall.
I think we'd have a good, maybe in the springtime, we'll get you back and do a show about what to plant and when to plant, things like that.
That'd be interesting, yeah. Let's see what El Nino does to us this year.
That's a topic. We'll write it down. We'll get something going on in the spring then. We'd love to have you back. All right, Jim, thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Thanks again.
Thank you. All right, guys. Well, I hope I've learned a lot. I did not realize that the time change was very a key element in the leaves changing colors. So that is awesome. I'm very glad to have learned that. So we hope you guys, especially our teachers watching, maybe you can go back to the classroom tomorrow and tell your students a little bit about that. Little science into your day tomorrow. So we appreciate Jim coming on. Next week we're going to be talking with Brian Busby, the chief meteorologist from KMBC in Kansas City. And then the last Wednesday of the month, we're going to be talking about nor'easters. We're going to have Mr. Dave Warren on from Philadelphia, as well as Rob Eichler, who owed us a show. He is now at Fox in Boston. I can't remember the call. I think it's Fox 25 in Boston. He's going to be joining us as well to talk about nor'easters. And then November the 4th, we're going to be talking with Mr. Larry Cosgrove about this upcoming winter and what we think may be coming from it. So, guys, anything to add before we sign off tonight?
None for me.
All right. All right.
Don't forget to tune in to the after show on Periscope. We'll do the after show, like always.
After show on Periscope. So everyone, thanks for watching, and we will catch you next week. Have a great weekend, and stay warm. It's going to be cold this weekend.
With your blankets, that's a wrap.